The Legend of Zelda, one of the most well-known and well-received series. This beloved franchise has touched the hearts of many, inspired countless fan art, animations, songs, movies, you name it. It is astounding to have a game series have as many entries as Zelda does, and have them all be well-received. Sure, some entries are better than others, but very few feel there are legitimately bad Zelda games. Stories told through Hyrule, Lorule, Termina, and other realms all share the same fated hero, Link. Not always going by the name, but at least going by the identity, the hero of legend. Zelda was one of the main series I grew up with. It inspired me heavily, especially when it comes to my more original work. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't biased or heavily invested in the characters and tales woven by this franchise. Zelda was a part of my childhood, and it continues to fuel me in hopes that one day I could tell a story to inspire others the way that Zelda inspired me. As we dive through this series, it's safe to say that there will in fact be possibly one-sided views, unpopular opinions, and of course, spoilers. Sure, not everyone loves the Zelda series, but almost anyone knows of it. Zelda paved the way for action-adventure games and even storytelling to a point. The settings, magic, music, story, and characters are memorable to all who play the games, even if the designs don't always make sense.
Oh, excuse me. I'm looking for the leader of the Gorons.
Oh, man. Alright. I'll show you the way.
Oh, no. You can just point. It's fine, really.
No, it's fine. I'll just...
Oh my god!
Oh, no. The pain, it hurts so bad.
Why are your legs so brittle? Your body's the shape of a boulder. You have little twig legs.
No, it's fine. Still got one good one.
What is happening?
You did this! It was you! My blood is on your hands!
I didn't... I told him he could just point.
Alright, what seems to be the problem here? Officer down! Do it, son. Just pull the trigger. You've caused us enough pain already. Just make it end. Take the shot! Take the shot!
Now, if you didn't know, there's a lot of Zelda games, so with this mini-series, I will only be covering the main console Zeldas. So there's not going to be any handheld Zeldas, spin-offs, or this. To begin, we go back to the first Zelda, which was released in Japan on February 21st, 1986. The original Zelda was designed to be an anti-Mario of sorts, leading the player to explore and problem solve, rather than just pressing on ahead for a very clear objective like in Mario. And boy, did they reach that, because the first Zelda can be a little confusing to anyone going in blind. I mean, there's almost zero hand-holding in the game, minus a few cave hermits that give you cryptic metaphors. Other than that, you're on your own. There is nothing to tell you where to bomb, torch, or whatever. That's on you. Good luck, Binch. There's only like 50 million bajillion different tiles that can be affected by multiple different items. Not to mention, bombs are in high demand here, only allowing you to hold 8, and you come along them few and far in between. Plus, as with the NES, some enemies are just dumb. They're just dumb. The cursed pixies in this aren't tied to walls. They don't bounce in diagonal movement. They just move sporadically, cause that's great, yeah. Darknuts can't be hit from the front and turn whenever they feel like it. Sure, they can be hit by bombs, but again, you need bombs. All the time. You need a bomb for that. That's a bomb. There's using that bomb. The game is a bit of a jumbled mess, but if you know what to do, it can actually be pretty enjoyable and rewarding, minus some frustration with poor enemy designs. Just get ready to die and die and die and curse that you don't have more bombs and wander around aimlessly a bunch. Granted, most of these issues are just because of system limitations and lack of experience in developing games of this caliber. But Zelda was basically the first of its kind and brought around a unique item system and fun exploration. The bosses, despite being reused every other dungeon, were a refreshing change of pace from the generic wandering around somewhat aimlessly enemies. There is a decent amount wrong by today's standards, but at least it's not... Oh my god. Oh, it smells so fucking bad. Alright, it's just Zelda 2. Now, it is popular to hate on this game, and we got them special snowflakes talking about how good it is, but let me let you in on a little secret. It's not. It's not a good game. Zelda 2 looks at Zelda 1 and says, I want to beat that! If it was eaten, shat out, eaten again, and then that person's stomach gouged open and had Zelda pried out of its bloody corpse. The Adventure of Link gets rid of the top-down combat in exchange for ass. The emphasis was supposed to be on sword fighting, but most enemies just flail mindlessly, giving you very small openings, and the main foes you face seem to just perfectly block your attacks, making you either have to get lucky or cheese them. Which I doubt was the game's intention, because when I think of sword fighting, a small man jumping and swiping repeatedly is not really what comes to mind. Usable items are essentially gone. Instead, you have magic, which you need always and never have enough of. Healing can only be done in towns, or if you luck into a fairy zone, or by using magic, which again, you always need. There are no puzzles, just fighting. The boss fights can range from alright to you know. Not to mention, the game is pretty fucking linear. There is some freedom, but most of the dungeons have an item that you need for the next or previous town to get a spell needed to access the next dungeon, and without a map, you better hope you luck into them before you come across any boss. Plus, the game relies on a lives system, which I mean in any game is just dumb. Live systems do nothing but pad out a game and mask it behind a veil of difficulty, which if you actually look past the veil, you just find a big old pile of shit. Some games, sure, it can be alright because it doesn't punish you too hard. It's not difficult or challenging to have run out of lives near the end of a dungeon and then go all the way back to the first area, run to the temple, crawl through it again, and hope that you didn't run out of lives this time. It's annoying. And that's all Zelda 2 is. Annoying. Punishing someone that hard is essentially starting someone out at their job, and anytime that they get something wrong, you make them go through submitting another application and interviewing again to get their job back just to take another shot at a mistake. Oh, and the reason they made the mistake is because you kept throwing forks at them while they worked. It is dated, generic, side-scrolly, BS enemy NES garbaggio. The music is pretty good, but there's only about 6 songs, and I hope you like transitioning from overworld to encounter nonstop because the random encounters are constant and tedious. Plus, the game just doesn't look that great. I know it's the NES, but everything just looks boring, and some of the color choices are disgusting. I mean, look at this fucking temple. Better yet, look at this temple when you're moving. I had to take eye drops after beating this because it hurt my eyes so badly. And that's how bad Zelda 2 is. It physically hurts me because of how bad it is. Then, then came A Link to the Past. The favorite of many, and it for sure rests in my top 5. This game was astounding, and it still is. It's aged wonderfully and remains in the fond memories of most who have played it. You have tons of games nowadays trying to hit a retro feel, but they all go with this disgusting mesh of 16 and 8-bit with tons of gross overlays and bloom effects. Nah man, fuck that. You got 16-bit glory with fancy dancy Mode 7 effects, complete with an amazing soundtrack that is constantly referenced in modern day Zeldas. Link to the Past showed how magical a game could be. Not to mention, this started a somewhat darker tone in the series. Before the game even starts, it shows off the corpse of Zelda's father. And when you begin, your uncle warns you to stay inside, providing an immediate sense of a threat. When you venture outside, you are greeted by a darkened world with rain falling from the sky, which, oh dang! That was pretty damn amazing back then. Add on to that the shade from the trees when roaming in the wood and seeing the view on top of Death Mountain. This game really helped you feel the world it was trying to show you. The enemies were tougher, the puzzles more complex. I mean, compared to the NES. Plus, there was a new arsenal of tools at your disposal. This game created so many staples of the Zelda series, it's ridiculous. Not to mention, alongside the darker side of the story, it also created the more lighthearted areas. NPCs had fun and varied dialogue, some areas were just there for giggles or Easter eggs. And of course, with this Zelda, we were introduced to one of the more well-known staples of the series, Cuckoos Get Pissed. This was the first game that had the swarm of chickens envelop Link in a feathery fury dance of death, which even people who don't avidly play Zelda kinda know about this. But alongside all of that, the game already presented a huge overworld. As soon as you open the map, it looked gigantic. But a little ways through the game, zap blab, wow, you're in the Dark World, son! That map literally just doubled, hosting even more dungeons with more items, power-ups, and fantastic bosses at the end. Bosses that felt like bosses, each one with its own unique moveset that wasn't just stand there and spit shit like bosses of the previous games. Except Blind. Fuck Blind. I don't need a goddamn bullet hell game in Zelda. There were side quests that weren't necessary to progress the game like the ones in Zelda 2. The heart pieces instead of containers rewarded the player for exploring more. There was basically a ton you could miss out on if you just went from dungeon to dungeon. Speaking of, the dungeon seemed massive with multiple floors. The big keys got you excited knowing it would unlock a path to the boss, and also the big chest containing your next item. Playing through it again, I still enjoyed it, with the only real downside for me being that sometimes it was a little difficult to maneuver, but the enemies were balanced, no bullshit tactics like previous Zeldas. A few issues were fixed too. The sword spin allowed for easier combat as opposed to Link's jabs from 1 and 2, plus bombable walls and surfaces were viewable. Even the ones that didn't have an obnoxious crack, you could actually rank a tank with Link sword to find out if a bomb would open that sucker up. The A button used a lot of commands, but it really only brought up issues in select circumstances. You may or may not view A Link to the Past as your favorite Zelda, but at least from a gameplay and technical standpoint, it's definitely up there, if not number 1. The game looks, sounds, and above all, plays well. After that beauty, years went by, and we made the transition from 2D to 3D, thus spawning a very debated Zelda game, Ocarina of Time. This game to some is the greatest game ever made, and to others is overrated. In fact, the ratio has kinda shifted, and nowadays it seems like it's more popular to hate the game rather than love it. I rarely see too many people talking about it being the best game ever, but I see a lot of people complaining about it. To me, it's fun. It's a game and it's fun. I'm not really on either side, and so take that how you want. I mean, when it comes to Ocarina of Time, it's not really about whether the game is great or not, it essentially just boils down to people wanting to hear that they're right. So let me give you these sound bites. I think Ocarina of Time is a piece of shit. I think Ocarina of Time is the greatest game ever made. There you go, I side with your argument. I would maybe agree that at its release it could be considered the best. There wasn't a whole lot to compete with it, but the game hasn't really aged too well. Ocarina of Time threw the player into a 3D world, told a legend, and sent you on a quest. The magic and beauty of the game was stunning, and that alone was enough to blind a lot of gamers. The actual cinematic scenes of the game were just amazing. When prior to that, the most in-depth scene you really got was Ganon smashing into the pyramid. The Z targeting system made combat fun and effective, even in the new 3D environment that players weren't used to, which of course paved the way for a lot more 3D action-adventure games. The game has its flaws, there's no doubts about that. For starters, it is painfully slow. The text crawls along the screen and there is no skipping it. Navi reminds you of things you already know or could figure out by, you know, looking at the screen, which just adds more text. Plus, everything needs a cutscene. Now, granted, the actual story cutscenes were pretty amazing. It was so cool to see the goddesses with the Triforce, and the ones for the adult timeline only got more intense. But those should be saved for beating dungeons, plot progression, or boss intimidation. I shouldn't need a cutscene every time I step on a switch. I know what's going to happen. You don't have to jerk my head to the side and be like, remember that locked door that was right fucking in front of you when you got in the room? And then step through and have the game be like, oh no, the door's shut now. What-oh, look at this, there's enemies here. What do we do, Link? What do we do? Only to fight the enemies and have the game again be like, wow, those enemies I pointed out sure are dead. Let's look at another door. Oh, it's open. Oh, what is happening here? It's a chest. Just stop. There is so much padding to the game. In Link to the Past, if you did something, bam, it was done. Maybe the game would give you a chime, which was basically just a pat on the back, good job, buddy. Whereas Ocarina of Time dimmed the lights and sang, we are the champions every time you took a bite out of the meal it prepared for you. Considering that the world was so big at the time, it's still a bit of a letdown that the story in Dungeon Road is pretty streamlined, offering little to no variety in your paths. There wasn't really as much of a reason to explore, or rather, no places to explore. The game basically takes you to every corner of the game, with very few areas that aren't touched on the main quest, which were mostly just little copy-paste caves that were hid under rocks. Plus, upon visiting it again, Hyrule Field is just boring. There are almost no enemies during the day, which was a huge departure from every other Zelda. Still, the game did have some neat little features and side quests, plus a few Easter eggs that took a bit more effort to find than other games. The game furthered the amazing music of Zelda, adding even more well-known additions to the soundtrack of the series. Hyrule Field, despite being empty, did amaze at first glance if just for that camera pan and music. Sure, it was tedious running across an empty field, but you did get some sense of progression. When you got Epona, you could just blast through the field with ease. But when you factor in the painfully slow, unskippable text, the obnoxious hand-holding and padding, and a few less than fun dungeons, it does start to weigh on you when you're not blinded by childlike wonder. Ocarina of Time was my first Zelda game that I fully completed. I didn't get into gaming too much until the N64. My family was pretty poor when the NES and SNES came out, so I could really only experience those consoles at friends' houses or stores. But with Ocarina of Time, it was mine. Well, more so after a young me accidentally deleted my father's save, causing him to never play through it again, but at that point, it was mine. I went through that journey, and as a wide-eyed boy with the ability to name the character after me, yeah, that's right, I self-inserted. And before you get all pissy about that, if one of you can honestly say you'd prefer being a kid in society or working a 9-to-5 job over living in the world of Hyrule, you either got the illest fucking job in the world or you're blowing some hot steamy shit right out your mouth. I digress. To me, I was Link. I did go on that journey. I fought the monsters and I saved the villages. It made me feel like I was special, as cheesy as that was. It was my first real feeling of accomplishment and what instilled my love of games at that point. It told a story that inspired me to make my own and let me live through an adventure I wanted to lead others on as well. Ocarina of Time is not my favorite game of all time, and it isn't even in my top 3. But it is what inspired a lot of who I am. Granted, not so much the salty, angry, gamey rant guy, but more the original and artistic side of me. And for that, it'll always have a special place in my heart. It is not the best game, and it's a bit of a chore to play through nowadays. If nothing else, the game is unique in the ridiculous glitches it created, which of course fed into the speedrunning community. Hell, the things speedrunners did to this game alone makes me kinda like it more. Sure, it isn't intentional, but with some of the speedrun routes, even if you aren't that fast, can still give you some more freedom to the game than it was originally designed to give you. And I mean, come on, how on earth did someone figure out how to do the wrong warp? Hell, how do people figure out 90% of glitches anyway? To this day, people speedrun the game constantly, with a large set of routes and rules for various forms of play. The game has its flaw, but if a game can still conjure up this much activity, I think it's a bit one-sided to say it's completely bad, even if it isn't your cup of tea. The main issues with Ocarina of Time essentially boil down to the fact that we grew up. Nintendo pretty much focuses on the child audience, so the older we get, the more flawed these games become. But again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Next time on Zelda with a Side of Salt, we'll pretty much cover everything except for Breath of the Wild. That one's gonna take a little bit.